Welcome to our episode. I don't know the number it is, but we're going to be talking about parenting tonight. And we wanted to start it off by sharing our different upbringings and then different things I think we learned along the way that we wanted to apply or really bring into our parenting of our kids. Now, I know we still have a lot to learn. And I know for some of you guys, you have kids older than us and we're learning from you. And some of you have kids younger than us, and hopefully we'll share a few things that would be really helpful for you as you're raising your own kids. So do you want to start sharing your story?
Sure.
Okay.
So we kind of wanted to share both our individual upbringings, not every detail, but especially in the realm of discipline, how we were kind of raised, the expectations as children that we had within the realm of our behavior and our obedience. And that would kind of lead us into like, well, how did that frame how we initiated our parenting style and how we were going to discipline our kids and raise them up in what we thought to be the best way that we can. So I don't have a super in-depth story, but I did want to share that I was brought up in such a way that my parents were very, to most people's perspective, pretty strict. We were disciplined fairly quickly when we were disobedient. We were affirmed of what the rules are. Our discipline involved spanking. Sometimes it was just being yelled at. Sometimes it was being screamed at. And there was several means of different types of physical punishment that we would go through. And I don't want to say fear was the only way that me as younger children and my siblings were kind of encouraged to follow the rules. But in all honesty, that was a large part of it. We feared the discipline, right? We feared what is going to be my punishment. How many spankings am I going to get? How mad is mom or dad going to be?
Oh, wait, funny story. My favorite line that Zach's mom told me, he said, is, "I didn't see me do it." Our kids have said similar things along the way.
Sure.
Like, was it Emma who said, you said, "Did you do this?" And she said, "Kids do it." Yeah. And Zach's like, "You're a kid. Kids do it."
Right. So, but bottom line, my parents loved me very much. They raised me to follow the rules. They raised me in the church. They taught me to follow God. So it wasn't like the physical discipline was the only aspect of their teaching or guidance in my life. And I can say that they've done a good job. By no means am I trying to undermine what my upbringing was. I just wanted to share what it was. So,
and I think I know I didn't know you then at all, but from retrospective, what I learned was, when you guys were teenagers, though, you guys respected your parents.
Yeah.
And your parents were not strict with you guys at all at that point because you knew the rules and you respected them.
And we feared the consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good point that Chelsea and I have discussed over the course of the 10 plus years that we have been parents, and just comparing different ways that we grew up was like it was just I was just framing an agenda timeline here.
You're usually
and wasn't presenting a birth certificate to the audience.
Specifics here.
So but no, Chelsea and I have talked about this before, and my parents were very, very strict from the point of my memory going back through my young adulthood. And I lived with my parents up through the age of almost 19 years old. And much like Chelsea kind of spilled the beans already, is when I became a teenager, and it's hard for me to pinpoint this date, and you're dogging me from being specific, but I would honestly, I would say around the time that I was in 8th grade, I didn't have a lot of rules. per se that I had to follow, or things that I knew I couldn't look up on a whiteboard and see the 10 rules I had to follow. And that's because my parents laid a foundation of respecting authority, knowing what right and wrong was, and that when you do wrong, there are consequences. Now, when I was younger, my consequences were menial in nature, whether it be a spanking or grounding, and I wasn't grounded much. I mean, I couldn't tell you. I probably count on one hand how many times I was grounded, and literally that was just a loss of a privilege, mostly when we were older, and the one or two times where we needed to be disciplined. But for the most part, the true parenting took place between the ages of 1 and 10, or from birth until 10. That's your true time to influence your kids. And not to say that you can't discipline or change behavior or perspective of your children or how they think about things after 10, but I will say from my experience that holds true. It's challenging to change learned behaviors after a set amount of time. So I think that my parents got that very right in their upbringing of me and my siblings, that, hey, if we don't have some foundation behind our discipline, the discipline's only going to become resentment towards your parents, and that's not going to turn into a fruitful relationship. So, and I'm not going to sit here and tout anyone. I think every parent at the end of their life could say, I could have done something better. But I'm very, very grateful for the upbringing I've had. And just like me, to my kids, I would convey to them in the same way that, hey, I just hope you learn from me and your mom as we parent you, as to things that you saw that we did really well, or things that we didn't do so well, and find a better way to make sure that your children are raised in the Lord, are raised respectfully, and carry that discipline into their youth, young adulthood, and until they're on their own. So that's kind of my background. Did I miss something?
No, I think we were having a conversation one time. I remember we were driving in some random place in California, but it was like one of those weird towns where it was like super small and confusing one-way streets. Anyway, and we were talking about how, we were talking about this very thing of like the things that our parents that we really appreciated, and, the things that, we hoped that we could make better. And I feel like, I'm in total agreement that that's really how we should do it is, we hope our kids take the good things that we do and also learn from the things we don't do so well. And every parent is trying to be better than their parents, in that sense. So for my story, I don't remember a lot of discipline when I was a kid. I just don't. I mean, and that probably has something to do with the fact that, my parents were divorced, and, so I wasn't 100% of the time in any home. I was mostly with my mom, but I mean, my dad was extremely consistent and present, and would come and, take me every other weekend and holidays and, whatever, whatever the agreement was. So I don't really remember a lot of discipline when I was a kid. And it wasn't until, maybe like teenage years. And I would say, my dad and stepmom were pretty strict in a lot of things. But the thing was, unless I was following the Lord, like that was the key for me. If I was following the Lord, like I respected them and I honored them and I obeyed them and I would do what they said. But if I wasn't, watch out now. I would do what I wanted. I would tell them what they wanted to hear, and then I would just do what I wanted to do. And so I think that that's something that has really carried over into how I want to parent, is that the most important thing is Jesus getting a hold of our kids' hearts, because he is going to do way more work in them than I could ever do. But also as a parent, to be faithful in the discipline when they're young, spare the rod, spoil the child. It's in the Bible for a reason. And I think every kid is different too. I mean, yes, we support spanking, but like, even with our oldest Holly, we just had to tell her a stern word, or, express that we were disappointed in the fact that she did not do what was expected or the right thing, or, whatever. And And that would be enough, to really crush her. And I think Ruth is kind of a lot like that too, in the sense of, like she gets sassy, but she is very smart and she knows when she's crossed the line.
Yeah.
And sometimes she still gets spanked. But then we had other kids that like spanking was like that all you got kind of attitude, and so it just depended on the child. But the most important thing I think that we've learned together is consistency and following through on what you say you're going to do and upholding that standard, even if it would be easier to not. Because a lot of times I'll say, like if you do that, you're going to get spanked. And then they do that. And inside I'm like, I don't want to spank you right now. It's extremely inconvenient. But I know that if I don't, then I'm setting a precedence that, you can have a few more tries until, discipline really comes through, or maybe it won't even. So, so just being consistent and following through no matter what, even if that means we're in a restaurant or a grocery store, stopping what you're doing and taking them out of that situation and doing what you need to do, and and setting them straight so that they understand. Because I keep talking, but I think one thing I've learned too is that a perspective to take is, in our household right now, it's a safe place for our kids to make mistakes and to experience consequences. But someday they're not going to be under our roof in our responsibility, and consequences are going to be much heavier and more severe. And so that's something that at least I express to our kids all the time, that I know you don't like the consequence, but you need to learn to obey us, because in doing so, we hope you learn to obey God first and foremost, because right now your obedience to us is obedience to God. But someday you don't have to obey us anymore, so we want to really convey that to our kids, that you're obeying us because it's how you're learning to obey God in your life when you go out on your own. And
yeah. And I know Chelsea ran past the format for tonight. She already started getting into.
Sorry, I did. I jumped right in. That's how I roll.
No, that's
right
okay.
to the point. Let's get to the point.
Yeah, but
we're also both tired. He has to get up early, so this is going to be a little shorter than usual.
We always say that, and then they end up being longer. But anyway.
So shush. Let's get to the point.
All right. So what I wanted to kind of talk about was the phases of our parental experience. So, obviously Chelsea shared a little bit about her upbringing with her parents and her unique situation, because every household's a little bit different. And I shared my upbringing, and the bottom line is, we, just like in our relationships of how we interact with other people, and we bring that into how we have, intimate relationships with our spouses, sometimes those techniques or practices need to be tailored and changed from what we're used to. Mm-hmm. So I know, at least I can say that I regret some of the techniques that I initially took with my older kids, because I was still a brand new dad. I didn't know the best way to approach our kids when they were misbehaving, or a temper tantrum or whatever.
Well, I think we were much more immature too. So
that's just
we were
natural.
More reactive,
we were younger, we were
sure. Emotional,
yeah.
Right.
So when I look back really at Holly and Gabe and Emma, I don't want to say that they're held to a different standard, but perception is reality too, to your kids. So our older three kids kind of have catch on, that sheesh, that Ruth and Bo are treated a little differently than they were. And I've even had conversations with some of our older kids of, hey, just so you know, I'm not giving them free passes, or I love them any less than you, or I didn't,
or love them more,
choose to discipline them in a different way besides spanking than I did you. But I learned through God's grace that, hey, each one of my children are so different. God has made them different. They respond to things differently. And Chelsea already, talked about how Holly and perhaps even Ruth, that we're learning, respond to different types of correction. So when God calls us to discipline our children, and he most definitely does, it's important that we also understand that people respond differently to different types of discipline. So it's not that Ruth and Bo have it easier. And I know that there's a stereotype out there. Everyone else says, oh, that's the baby of the family, or that was an oopsie, right? If there's a much younger child than normal.
They're both intentional.
Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, in that scenario, maybe the parents were more lax in their discipline, and that may or may not be right. I don't know all those nuances. I'm saying that could be a reality. But in our specific case, because we're just sharing our experience, I think it was more so that Chelsea and I learned along the way better ways, or at least more effective ways. Because when it really comes down to it, when you discipline a child, you're not trying to hurt them.
No, because that's punishment.
You used the word break their soul earlier. I just wanted to point that out. Yeah, she did. You said when you give Holly a harsh word, it breaks her soul.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Or crushes her soul. And that's not our intent either.
No.
So I wanted to quickly clarify the intent in any form of discipline you use, whether that's a verbal discussion, whether that is a spanking or a timeout, or later on in life, a grounding, or a loss of privilege, whatever technique you determine is best for your child. And that's going to be situationally dependent. The true bottom line is you're trying to change their behavior and have a changed perspective of how their actions were incorrect, and that there was a better, more God-fearing way of conducting yourself. That's really the end result. So I think that as we grew as parents, we understood that more holistically and determined that, oh yeah, don't get me wrong, there's times where Bo and Roosters are gonna get a spanking, but most of the time, at least for me, and Chelsea could probably agree, most of the time now I won't default to a spanking or a physical form of discipline unless it's blatant disrespect. That is a thing that has to be squelched and understood between you and the child, that is unacceptable behavior. That's just a non-tolerable thing, a zero tolerance type of behavior. And that's just our perspective. Now, other misbehavior, whether it's being squirrely or not listening when told to be quiet or whatever, there's other ways where you can still get that change behavior. But in the same time, as Chelsea talked about, you have to follow through with what you say, because then they're not going to understand. They're going to push the envelope. Children understand. They are very perceptive.
And do not count. Ever. I know I want to do it too.
You have 3 seconds to take your pants down. So
but it's not helpful, because what it's doing is it's training your kid to say, I can continue doing this for 3 more seconds.
Right.
Until the hammer actually comes down.
Yeah.
Or they'll do it right up to that boundary. So just don't do it. I know it's easy. It is. Because you gotta.
It's easy to count. Yeah.
It is. Like it's easy. It's almost like you're psyching yourself up because you're gonna have to punish your child or discipline your child. Yeah. But it's just, it doesn't have good long-term benefits for anyone. So continue, carry on. Were you done with that? Sorry. I'm sorry. I distracted you.
No, I think to summarize what I was trying to get across
consistency and follow
consistency, no matter what method of discipline you have, and you have to have some honest reflection on your own part. Was that effective? Was just a verbal discussion good enough? Was a grounding good enough? Did that truly
did it change the behavior?
Yes, exactly, because that's the end goal that I talked about. And somewhat related to how I shared my experience as a child is, there has to be some substance to, what is motivating that child to be well behaved. And we as Christ following individuals would obviously agree that it's, hey, you want to honor God. That's really what you want to do. And a lot of times I ask my children when they're not being as nice as they could be to each other, not necessarily fighting or doing anything, but they're just being harsh with their words. I will just pop the door open, the sliding door to the backyard. Hey, are we being kind? Are we being patient? Are we loving one another? and I don't say this flippantly, but I'd just be like, hey,
What would Jesus do? That was
no,
better.
yeah, I don't, not necessarily that, but I will say, would
Yeah.
God be pleased with your behavior and the way that you're treating each other right now? And that just is it's like a curb. You're going down the road, you need those lane identifiers, or you need a curb to bump you back to the path of where you need to be. So
that's what we do as parents, right?
Right.
We have the bumpers established, and we try to keep our kids, in the lane until they learn to walk it themselves and stay in there. Right. Because we know that the true freedom comes in staying within God's boundaries, and that's where the freedom is. And it's not a limiting thing. So we're trying to convey that. One other thing I did want to add, and this is something that I don't think I've seen a lot of in parenting, but I think something that has become more powerful, I guess, to me, is when I make mistakes to go to my kids and ask their forgiveness, and to just tell them, like, I did not handle that well. I'm sorry. I let my emotions get the best of me. Like for instance, I remember one day Holly raised her voice at me and she said some words, and I, raised my voice back at her and said some words, which is not the mature thing to do as the adult. Like, we don't lower ourselves to their emotional level and engage, and so then she went off to her room, and then, when she came back down, I just told her, I said, I'm sorry. Like, I should not have yelled at you like that, or just handled that whole situation like that. And honestly, I've found this most powerful teaching moments at those times when I'm saying, listen, mom didn't get it right. And I'm sorry, can we start again and try this again? I've just seen like a softening in our kids when in those situations, that they're like, wow, okay, yeah,
Because just like when we have conflict with our spouse or anyone else, what is everyone's immediate reaction?
To defend ourselves,
right? So they put up a wall, we put up a wall. But when you have those heart-to-heart conversations and you show them that you're human too, I make mistakes too. You're bringing your wall down, and you're showing them that it's okay for them to do that too. And maybe they might express a reason behind their behavior, that if it's overlooked for a long amount of time, it could really turn into something much more serious as to why they might act out at school or other places. So no. And one thing that I'll add on to what you said is not just showing that you make mistakes, but your discipline always has to come from a place of love.
Right. Not emotion or reaction or anger.
And that is way easier said than done.
It is. Sometimes you have to take 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath and count to 5, like Daniel Tiger says.
Sure. But it's important that because discipline is only one interaction we have with our kids, maybe in a set amount of time. But if you never showed through your words, your tenderness, and just your demeanor towards your kids, if you're grumpy and cranky and angry and your tone is not loving to others or that you interact with, they see it. So they'll emulate it and or perceive your discipline as something that is not loving.
Well, I think we see it all the time that, if you're a mom and you stay home, our family tends to take on our attitude, and if we have a bad attitude, that's like the fastest way to bring your whole family down. Right. And, if you're in a bad mood and your husband comes home and, well, now he's in a bad mood, everyone's in a bad mood. It's like, if we could just realize as moms and wives, we have so much power in that to really change and alter the course of our families, So, yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to say that it really comes down to that, no matter what type of discipline method you choose to use in your home, now or going forward, if it's coming from love, I mean, that's a great place to start. Make sure that you're coming at your children, and your children have a very good understanding that you love them, and no matter what mistake they made, you offer them complete forgiveness, but at the same time, there's standards to live to, and so that they're clear within your home. Yeah.
So then I think, like, as our kids get older, I think, our kids are almost to the teen years.
Mhm.
And I think one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten recently is about things like dating and technology and, different things that like we haven't let our kids do yet. And obviously, because our kids are still young. But I've always taken the same approach as my dad, and that like can't date till you're 30, which is the joke, but at the same time, like this, I had a couple people tell me this, that don't we want our children to engage in these activities still within our safety bumpers so that we can help them and help them to make wise decisions, rather than just going out and finding somebody to marry, and it's the first person they ever dated and they don't know anything about anything, and they don't make the best choice just because it's one of those like forbidden fruits, right? Like you can't do that, so of course, what do you want to do? I want to do it, right? So just having that perspective of intentionally teaching and training, right? Training is a big piece of parenthood.
Yeah.
I feel like it's teaching and correcting in the beginning, and then it really moves more into training, which is more like hands-on, and because our kids are going to get to a point where they're not going to consult with us as much anymore.
Yeah.
Especially if we haven't fostered that connection and communication and training atmosphere, they're not going to come to us. And we want to foster these relationships with our children as they age so that they can always come to us and talk to us about things, whether it's hard things, things that make them nervous, embarrassed, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that they will do that, because the worst thing is that our kids leave and they never consult us again. I mean, our kids are going to leave. Good. I'm glad. Like, I want our kids to leave the nest, but I want that relationship to change into more of like a consulting type thing, and
I think it's
like
okay to say the word
helpful.
friendship when your children are under
once they get
your
older.
authority.
Yeah.
You would never say that I'm your friend. Not to say that you don't share the same qualities of emotions and relationship. Right. Not a pure like friendship. Right. You don't establish that until they're outside of your authority. Right. And then you become more of a wise counsel. And like yet a friend. Yes, a mentor slash friend. I'd agree with that.
Yeah. So that was just one thing that I'm looking forward to. I think so many people dread the teenage years because of changes and emotions and all those things. But I think knowing that perspective, it makes me a little bit more excited, and, and to get to those years and thinking of ways now to start fostering that communication. One thing that Holly and I have done is both of us are better with writing, like physically writing our words and getting our thoughts out in pen. So we have a journal that we write back and forth to each other. And, we don't do it all the time, but like she's had some questions that probably would be uncomfortable to talk about out loud. And, but we've been able to, at least start the conversation in there. And then, if we need to have a real conversation face to face, voice to voice, we can. But that's been really helpful, I think, for us, especially we live in a noisy house. So having a conversation sometimes is difficult, at least an uninterrupted one, and having 5 kids, we can't like
someone's always in your business.
Right. Having 5 kids, we can't like go on a date with every single kid every single month. Like,
so many people have done that.
10 days out of the month.
Yeah, it's been
for each of us.
Right. That's been a great or a very common recommendation in a lot of parenting conversations amongst coaches and mentors and stuff. And it's like, yeah, that'd be great if I had 1 or 2 kids.
Maybe 3. But 5.
But especially I would argue if you have a boy girl. That automatically generally means that you're probably doing 2 different activities. You might take your girl out to a ballet, or you might take your son to a ball game. So you try to find something they want to do.
Girl days and boy days, which is still kind of difficult because, like, if Zach has a boy day with Gabe and they go to a ball game, well, both still a little. Yeah. He's only 3, so
that'll
get there. Yeah. And even with like, if we have a girls like spa day or something, like Ruth is still kind of I mean, she's 5, she's getting older, so
Mhm.
at this point, we just do everything together.
Yeah.
We always go as a family, and
Sure.
every now
And
and
that's
then we
great
get
time
little
too.
individual times, but
Yeah.
it just is the nature of our big family,
Yeah.
So
And I really like that you talked about how you journal with Holly, because as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, a lot of times just talking with your kids, having more than just a how was school? Oh, good.
usually
And
talking
then
to them right at bedtime, right when they're supposed to be going to sleep.
sure,
That's when
yeah,
they want to like talk
jibber
about all the
jabber.
world's problems and
So maybe exercise some patience beyond
right.
what you might have at the moment, and just hear that their little hearts speak, because
Yeah.
sometimes you can truly find out a whole lot more about the intimate differences of your child, or what desires they have, or the things they like or don't like, that you may never have known before, most of the time just because they don't tell you. Not to say that they don't tell you or won't tell you, but just having those conversations, talk with your kids, and that really will open your eyes a lot. And I'm not saying that, you know, 1 or 2 attempts and you're good, but I think there was one point when going back to the friend thing where, and I think I told Gabe, I said, I'm not your friend.
I say that to our kids all the time. I'm not your friend. I
and
love you, but
sure, like one of the first times I told him that, when he was old enough to kind of understand what I was saying, he's like, well, what do you mean you're not my friend? You know,
not your buddy or pal.
right. But that was an opportunity, a door opened by his questioning to say, I am way more than a friend to you.
Yeah.
I am your father. I'm going to love you no matter how many times you screw up, no matter how big you think the screw up is. I'm going to be there for you. But I'm going to be there in such a way that I'm going to offer you a way out as much as I can. But in the same way, I'm going to love you in such a way that I can help correct you and make sure that you're a gentleman, that you love the Lord. And, yes. And a lot of times, the way that I've really gotten to his heart when he's given attitude or misbehaving is I'll say, hey, Gabe, someday do you want a beautiful wife? Yeah. Do you want beautiful kids, and a similar life to what you have, which is way better than you can fathom at the moment? Yeah. I said, well, do you want your children to respect you? Do you want your children to be disrespectful to your wife, the person you love most? Well, yeah. And I said, how do you think that makes me feel that you might consider being disrespectful or disobedient to me or to your mom? Is that how you want to be treated? So, that's just one example of how you can ask your kid questions, because that makes them think.
Yeah.
So
and
talk
that's
to
what
your
we
kids.
want. We want our kids to think. We don't just want to always give them the answer.
Right. Like, you better listen to your mom, or hey, do you think it's okay to talk to your mom that way? Why don't you think so?
Right. Because I think one is fostering a relationship and one is just being a dictator.
Right.
Which there are times for both. But
Right.
and I think one thing I just want to remind everyone of, this is a marriage podcast. So the best thing you can do for your kids and your parenting is to put your marriage first and make sure that your kids are seeing that and hearing that, experiencing that. And also the fact that your priorities are God, your spouse, then your kids.
Yeah.
Like, our world does not revolve around our children. Our world doesn't even revolve around each other. It's God first, and we're in partnership. And I think the other thing I remind my kids all the time is that Zach and I chose each other. We chose each other. But God chose our kids to be our kids and for our kids to be each other's siblings. None of us had choices in any of that, right?
I need to explain something.
What?
My
Okay,
laugh
go
just
ahead.
now.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Funny, very side story. I'm sorry. I gotta
like
tell
side
it.
stories.
I know. I was hanging out with a lot of my nieces and nephews and my siblings at my parents' house, so grandma and grandpa's, and one of the boys was, and I said it in total love and a joking way, so nobody's feelings were hurt or anything like that, or I wasn't trying to step on any other parents' toes.
You weren't crushing any souls.
Well, I don't know about
Maybe
that,
a little.
but only in good fun. He knew I was in love.
Yeah.
But one of the kids was upset that I think my sister was getting her own plate and a plate for her husband or something like that, or helping out.
Yeah.
And I said to my nephew,
I thought that he was gonna sit by her and
that's right.
saving that
Thank
seat
you so much.
husband.
All I know is
his dad,
the spouses
right?
were, showing love to each other.
You can imagine 11 grandkids, it gets chaotic.
Yeah.
So
So anyways, I just happened to be walking by and I gave him one of these looks and I said, hey,
remember they can't see us on the
I know
podcast.
on the podcast with you. But I looked at him intently and I said, hey, bud, just to put this in perspective for you, your mom chose your dad. She got stuck with you. So that's why I was laughing when you said that.
Reality check, right?
Yeah, we all shared a good laugh to include him.
Yeah. It was more of like a nervous, like,
yeah, sure.
Okay. It is true though. Like the best thing, and I'm sure you guys hear this all the time if you're reading books or you're listening to other marriage podcasts, putting your marriage first is the best thing that you can do. Putting your relationship with the Lord first, then your marriage, and letting your kids see those priorities play out, because that is going to be the best education for them, is you actually modeling it and living it out. Not just saying read your Bible and pray, actually letting them see you do it, or doing it together as a family.
Because when you emulate love that your children can see towards your spouse, and they also hear you say, I love you to your spouse, when they hear you tell them that I love you, that's going to be reaffirmed through your actions, and they're going to know that it's genuine. And that just really helps.
That just reminded me, what is the percentage now of kids that walk away from their faith once they go to college? Like 80% or something like that?
It's off the charts, yeah.
It's crazy. And I've heard that one of the biggest reasons is that, aside from the way the world is, but it's because these kids went to church and they would see their families in church one way, and then they would go home and there'd be all this hypocrisy, and it's just like these two different worlds of, and it's like, how can you continue in a faith if you're, not that you can't, but if you're seeing this like two-faced or two-sided coin all the time of like, oh, my parents are perfect in church and they're like,
they hate each other.
Yeah, but at home they're like screaming at each other and they hate each other and they don't like us, and you know what I mean? Like, and so it just, again, like another challenge to yourself of like, you don't have to be perfect. Obviously, none of us are, but emulating those things, like you said, like really embodying them and letting the kids see that I'm the same in church as I am at home, and we're the same in the car as we are at church or at home. Though Sunday mornings, if you know Sunday mornings, the devil loves to get our attitudes down on Sunday mornings, doesn't he? What else? Is that it? Okay, I think we're wrapping it up.
Well, I think we covered all the things that we talked about.
Yeah, so we want to share our scripture that we really picked for this week. And obviously the big takeaway is, I don't know, figure out how to discipline your kids and stay consistent. I'm kidding.
Okay, first I'll share the verse and I'll provide what I believe to be the takeaway. Okay. I'll let you know.
I'll do a takeaway. You do a takeaway and then I'll do an action step and you do an action step.
Okay, perfect.
There you go. There's our planning meeting. You.
Oh, okay. Just check.
You just said that.
All right. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. So I don't think it really needs much explanation. Provide your children with the foundational aspects of what drives their behavior. What's the motivation behind how they conduct themselves? And if you can get after that, the true heart of your child, that's what's going to make the impact.
And one bonus little thought here is that God always moves from a place of love and Satan moves from a place of shame. And we never want to shame our children in those moments of discipline and correction. We want to highlight Jesus's love and forgiveness that covers that sin, or that misjudgment or misstep or, poor decision. Right. Yeah. So the big takeaway is?
I believe the takeaway would be to love your children, and that means disciplining them in the most appropriate way, that you see tangible change in their behavior. And if it's not, perhaps review or look into other ways of making sure that you can guide your children in the best possible way.
What was that parenting conference we did in
California?
Yeah, do you remember what that was called?
No.
I don't remember what that was called. Anyway,
Does it matter?
there are some great parenting and marriage conferences out there that, I'm sure online.
Yeah.
I think great resources. Just go looking for resources and you'll find some great things. So I think for our 2 action steps, the first one I feel like is find a way to connect with your children in their way to really, foster that relationship, but also to get to know them. They're their own individual. They're different than you are. They have their own likes and dislikes and,
Yeah.
I think that would be the first one. Do you have a second takeaway? Off the cuff.
Off the cuff. No, I think being real with your children would be my action step. Because kind of what Chelsea and I talked about earlier of being vulnerable enough to say, I messed up. I screwed up, right? So be real with your children so that will establish that you're not always coming from a place of just simply authority. And that's going to really flourish into a better relationship and probably one with more realistic respect.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's good. And on that, we are done.
All right.
Take care, guys.